Legal Tech for Africa.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of Legal Tech for Africa with me, Mohamed Wuriba, the space where law, technology, and innovation meet to shape the continent's future. Tonight, we dive deep into a question that is no longer hypothetical. It is already knocking on our doors. Can a chatbot give legal advice? And if so, what does that mean for the future of law or lawyers in Africa? Across the globe, artificial intelligence is quietly rewriting the rules, and many African cities, villages, and virtual spaces, people are already turning into AI for answers. That's my niece. Go outside. That's only lawyers could provide. From WhatsApp bots to courtroom automation, the legal world is transforming. Welcome again. Professor, welcome to the stream. I'm sorry about that.
No problem at all. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. That's my niece Khadija. She joined us for the stream today. Today we have additional guests. If you're just joining, this is the program Legal Tech for Africa. As I was saying, I'm with Professor Burkhard Schafer, and we're here to discuss the question or answer or attempt to give answer to the question whether chatbots can give legal advice. Professor, let's start the ball rolling. Can I or can anyone out there consult or retain the services of a chatbot? Can a chatbot give legal advice?
There's a very simple answer for that and a slightly more complicated one. The simple answer is yes, of course. And it's already happening. For many straightforward legal queries, you will interact with a chatbot. Some of them inform you about your rights without necessarily presenting themselves as legal chatbots. I was recently stranded by KLM at an airport. I couldn't get my connecting flight, and I was not able to speak with a human, at least not initially. I was directed to a rather badly engineered and programmed chatbot. And one of the things this chatbot did was to inform me of what it thought were my rights. It got it totally wrong. None of the things it said were true, either in law or from an organizational perspective. But in a way, it was giving legal advice or providing legal information. We have third-party chatbots for quite some time. DoNotPay, probably the most famous one, but they were precursors of these chatbots going back to the 1980s. So a simple answer is yes, of course, they can. Slightly more complex answer, should they? Is it a good idea that they give legal advice, or should we maybe use them for slightly different purposes? And the really complex answer is the lawyer's answer. It all depends. What do you mean with legal advice? Where does legal advice start and where is simply sharing an opinion begin? When you talk with your friends about law, as law students, you don't give each other legal advice. You learn together, you inform each other, but that is not what we mean with legal advice. So we have to be very careful, also because the expression legal advice has a very specific legal meaning in many jurisdictions, what we actually mean with that. In one way of looking at it, chatbots are just one particularly user-friendly way of interacting with a data set. Excuse me. They are ultimately, or at least in the past, could be simply seen as search engines. They were for you an ability to find out things about the law, but very often we would not call that giving legal advice, not any more than writing a legal textbook is giving legal advice. Googling for legal information, in a way, is giving legal advice. So that's probably not what we mean when we are asking these days, can a chatbot give legal advice? We probably mean something slightly different. And as a sort of first approximation, I would say, giving legal advice in the way ordinary people might understand it is you have a problem. You have the feeling that it might be a legal problem, but as a layperson, you don't know. Maybe you are upset about your neighbor playing very loud music at midnight, or littering on the street, or you want to visit another country and you want to find out if some of the things that are perfectly normal at home are permissible there. Is it allowed to bring haggis into the United States if you go there as a tourist? That could be a question that potentially has some legal salience to it. It is concretized. It is my legal question now. I have my context, my issues, and I want something that reassures me that what I do is legal, that I have a claim maybe to put forward, something like that. I think if we are thinking about legal advice along these lines, something that is concrete, deals with a specific situation, and once that situation evaluated, we probably get relatively close to what ordinary people will understand as legal advice.
So, Professor, let me hold you there. Sorry, I mean, for a person in a village in Africa, and who cannot, comprehend the risk of asking a legal chatbot, but he sees it as something accessible and cheap. What are the implications of that?
Okay, again, we need to be very careful here and possibly make a couple of distinctions. Would that be a situation where, in an ideal world, they would go to a human lawyer? Are we already talking about the level of complexity, the level of seriousness, where we would say a good legal system, a fair legal system, would provide that type of advice free at the point of use, so that even people who are economically disadvantaged have access to it? That is your legal utopia, if you like. And we can ask, even in that legal utopia, we probably have lots and lots of questions where we wouldn't want to go to a proper lawyer, just want to find certain things out. If I'm just mildly annoyed about my neighbor, or the council decides to build a road through my farm, and I want to know what is my situation with compensation, can they do that, what is the procedure? Certain things we probably wouldn't quite immediately go to a lawyer, even in that utopian world. We just want to find out things. So there we could say, well, to the extent that they are better than the current tools that we have, looking it up in a book in the library, Googling for it, something like that, where would be the harm? There's opportunity, I would say. There's opportunity to make the law more accessible in these low risk, low profile situations. Slightly different question. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, with following that question, I mean, how do you see the rise of these AI chatbot? Because we will come to general purpose AI. For now, I want us to stick on legal chatbot as they defined it. How do you see the rise of these chatbots changing, the landscape of public access? Because my previous question was about access. How do you see this changing the landscape to public access to legal advice, especially in resources constrained settings like ours in Africa?
Yeah. So again, let me just follow a little bit on my previous thought, because I will need some of the distinctions in my answer to that as well. So one is just information gathering where you would not normally want a lawyer. Then you get the slightly more realistic one. You are living in a society where at least the affluent people, if you have enough money, if you live in a big city where there are lots of lawyers, would normally go to a lawyer in that situation. So it's not one of the things where everyone says, oh, even if I could go to a lawyer, I wouldn't for this. We are dealing here with a situation where if you're living in the capital and if you have enough money, you would normally want to consult a lawyer here. Now you are living in the countryside, or you don't have the financial resources, and then getting a chatbot is the next best thing. It's not as good as some of your fellow citizens get, but it is better than nothing. And I think here we have difficult questions to answer and to discuss maybe a bit later, if that is still just and fair. And then we get to the situation where we would say your legal question is of the sort of seriousness where you definitely need legal advice. It's not any longer optional. It's a serious matter. You are accused of a serious crime. You suspect someone of a serious crime, or you're a victim of a serious crime. And then being told, oh, well, you are living in the countryside. We don't care for you. You are part of a group within the country that doesn't rank high on the priorities of politicians. We don't care about it. Here is some really, really crappy AI. See what you do with it. That's where we get the real problems. So I think there are already 3 different types of scenarios. Now, you talked about rural Africa, which in many ways is an interesting situation. One of the things that we also face, especially when AI is used as a replacement for legal services, is not just that people have different training using an AI, different background knowledge, but for lots of people, this is just physically not possible because you are living in part of the country where electricity supply is still very unreliable. And simply the infrastructure to access the information, even if it is digital, is not always there, just as one example. Or the AI is only speaking in one language, typically the majority language or one of the well-resourced languages. English has no problems building large language model. Spanish has no problems with large language model. German large language models, yeah, still okay. My understanding is in Sierra Leone, officially you have English,
Yes.
but also Creole as the most widely spoken language.
Yes.
And then quite a number of African languages. All of them have very, very limited digital resources to build large language models. So possibly the situation, the question doesn't arise for you simply because you're excluded from that technology on these grounds. Now, Africa, as I said, in that respect is interesting because in my understanding, it sort of jumped one step in the internet evolution,
Yes.
directly from the first idea to the mobile internet.
Yes.
Yeah, and with reasonably good reliability of mobile internet access in many parts at least. So you won't face the sort of questions or problems that you might face in rural India, for instance, where dependence on the infrastructure is higher. So if the infrastructure works reliably, and if your language community is served well because you happen to speak one of the languages that has generated large language models because there are lots and lots of speakers, lots and lots of digital resources, then using AIs for these slightly more serious sorts of consultation can be a good idea. But we have to be more careful here. And then we have to start to think, how should we do this? How should we make it available?
Yeah.
In principle, yes, if the right sort of safeguards are in place. So I would say, even though it is still maybe not as good a service as you would get if you're living in the capital, if you have enough money to phone up your personal lawyer, it is a reasonable alternative. And going back now to your second question, what I predict in one way or the other is that chatbots as a ubiquitous interface will be more and more the norm for people to access all sorts of information, including legal information. And often you will not even notice that you're speaking to a bot.
Yeah. Professor,
it's just the way it will work.
There is a concern here about that access. I mean, the fact that these models or these chatbots are not developed, are not planned, that are created by lawyers or people with legal education. But these are just technical people, engineers who collect data and build a large language model. What about that concern? What about that risk?
Yeah. Again, you could say, compare it with the old internet. Lots and lots of people edit Wikipedia entries, not all of them experts, some of them just interested lay people. And I would say in the past, quite a lot of people got information also about the law just from the relevant Wikipedia entry.
Yes.
I must admit, I sometimes use it for research, or from some other resource where the quality control is uneven and unclear. So the mere fact that the large language model or whatever AI you have is not developed by legally trained personnel need not be a problem as long as you use it for the right purpose. And that could be, for instance, just to get a general idea, to get an idea of what questions to ask. Again, imagine you go to a lawyer and you already know at least what questions you want to ask for them. That might reduce the time they bill you for the first interview because you can be more focused in your queries. That sort of thing, perfectly harmless, even if not done by professionals. The moment you really use it to replace what currently is given from professional lawyers, then we have to think about what is the right way of doing this. And there are different answers that are available. One that I would prefer, which I think would be really helpful, is that the professional bodies of the various law societies start to accredit certain technologies in the same way in which they accredit currently human lawyers. So if I want to become a human lawyer, as you know, you have to go to university, you have to convince a couple of professors like myself that you're not totally hopeless. And then you have typically also to convince the law society that you can be trusted with their clients. That is how we deal with human lawyers. And then you get certified both from your university and from your professional body. And ideally, I would like to see professional bodies becoming much, much more proactive in this field, starting to certify systems that they tested them under certain standardized environments. They analyzed how they were trained, what the source code way, and then they could put on a seal of approval. At least they can do that. And that would help citizens to distinguish something that probably is reliable, or at least as reliable as we could possibly get, from something that could have been cobbled together by anyone. Just in the same way as we learn to distinguish on Wikipedia articles that were written by knowledgeable layperson from those that were written by Lokis, trolls, and cranks.
That was where I wanted to take the conversation to. I mean, my question I'd envisaged was, where do we draw the line between assistance and impersonation? If the English language would allow me to say, I mean, where do we draw the line between a service delivered by a legal practitioner, whether it's AI chatbot or what have you, and one that is simply AI chatbot, but it's not from a legal professional or a legal professional system? Yeah.
So I think a couple of things would be important here and to consider. Firstly, does this chatbot, through its avatar, through the way it talks, through its environment, really try to impersonate, if you like, a lawyer? Does it sit with a wig on its head? Does it use overly lawyerly languages? That sort of misleading activity, I think we have to be really, really careful about, and potentially treat it as fraud, because that's it. That's what it is. If you pretend to be a lawyer giving legal advice, accredited legal advice, and you are not, if you are just a bot, then I would say this is closely to fraudulent. And legal regimes like the EU AI Act, for instance, they put a huge amount of emphasis on exactly that level of transparency. You should disclose, I am a bot, and these are my risk factors. I've been trained on this data, but not that data. I'm not tested and evaluated by the Law Society, but just some fun project. So transparency definitely plays a huge role here. I don't think it is enough on its own, because even if the AI doesn't try to be particularly lawyer-like, many people will still understand it as particularly reliable, trustworthy information. Even professionals. We just had a case in England where a professional lawyer believed an AI when she used it to write a brief, and there were at least 5 hallucinated cases in there. If that can happen to a professional, well, newly qualified, still in training lawyer, but still professional lawyer, what are the chances for the rest of us when we interact with the system? Now, that was a simple Google search, if you like, or the Google AI, I think. That one didn't pretend to be a lawyer or to give legal advice, but it pretended to speak authoritatively, reliably on its subject matter. So we need, again, certain levels of transparency. So for me, it's a twofold answer, if you like. We will have lots and lots of tools, unregulated, unchecked, that help people getting access to the law and understanding it, short of giving legal advice. They have to be transparent. They have to tell the user what it is that they are doing. And then there are those that we really use for legal advice in the traditional sense. And my preferred solution, at least to a degree, would be to certify not the company behind it or the lawyer maybe even who runs it on the website, but really certify that specific AI. Have someone, just as we do with many other products, run tests, convince themselves that it was developed in a sound way, and then put a seal of approval on it. The AI Act in the EU goes a bit in that direction. I would say there's a huge opportunity for legal professional bodies to take the initiative much more and say, yeah, this is a new field of activity for us, maybe even a new income source. And that's where we get a problem, unfortunately. We started with your example of a small village in rural Africa, probably not very rich people. I assumed from your description, they use a chatbot because they can't afford quality legal advice.
Yes.
Now, if we make the certification process by the law societies so expensive that in the end you have to pay similar amounts of money to the AI chatbot as you would to a lawyer, that would defy the purpose, obviously. So we have to be very careful to strike the right balance. Yes, we need regulation, certification, but we don't want to make it so burdensome that suddenly, again, the high quality ones, the good ones, are only accessible for the relatively affluent ones.
Professor, before we go for a short commercial break, you've spoken about regulating the process to make it more transparent. For someone from Africa, or let's say the continent as a whole, what regulatory models or framework should we or countries like us consider to adopt? I'm asking you this question because I know your role in the AI Act and some other legislations in the UK and elsewhere. What are the regulatory models out there that we can adopt? That's, you know, yes.
Yeah, I think there are at the moment 3 competing versions.
Yes.
Or 4, maybe. There's a European idea. And the European idea at the moment is we can regulate AI in general through abstract rules that cover pretty much all possible AI application independent of its use. So we put in rules how to build a large language model, how to be transparent about your large language model, this test that you have to go to show that it is unbiased and all that. And then you can use it for whatever purpose you want. Then there's a UK approach, the emerging UK approach that says, well, no, there are not enough similarities between an autonomous car, a chatbot that gives legal advice, a surgical robot, and a military robot. They all need different types of expertise. They need different regulators that understand the field, the domain in which the AI is used. And then there's, under the new US government's US approach, predictably, we don't want to regulate that at all. It prevents
innovation,
party donors making even more billions, and we can't have that. Let's leave it totally to the market. Yes, some transparency, maybe minimal transparency duties, but that's about it. And people will quickly realize which one of these systems is more reliable, better, and they will flock to it. So the purely market-driven model. And then we get China, and we get I get out of my depths because I do not really understand in which direction it is all going, because it seems to move into multiple different directions at the same time. But again, possibly moving to a more top-level rule-based one. Now, I personally would say for law, we really need legal expertise. I don't think getting legal advice is the same thing as buying a toaster, even an intelligent toaster with AI that tells me not to burn my toast. Justice is not a product. That is my personal view, that you buy in the supermarket. And that means for me, the professional standard setting bodies are the natural focus for regulation. I would probably go for like the UK, for a sector-specific solution, regulation primarily centering around the professional bodies. For Africa, that also means, and there I would be happy to have lots of discussions with you about it, how necessary it is to tailor the regulation to national legal systems because their differences are so extensive, or to what extent it is possible to have at least some pan-African rules that deal with cross-border conflicts, for instance, and things like that. I don't know enough about the coalface working on the ground in Africa to answer you that. The professional bodies obviously work best for national jurisdictions. They can certify for specific country. They might not be as suitable to help dealing with laws across the African Union, for instance. So a small, if you like, qualified focus on the professional bodies. They need to come up with rules, with certification schemes, and keep an eye on things that can be done on a higher level across the continent.
All right. I would like to respond to some of the queries you've raised. But before I do that, let's take a pause and chill a bit, get some water, and we'll come back in the next 2 minutes and then continue the conversation. Thank you very much to everybody that has tuned in so far. So good. Stay locked. We will be back as soon as possible. Thank you. If you're just tuning in, this is your weekly program, talk show, streaming live from Facebook and YouTube, Legal Tech for Africa, with me, Mohamed Wuriba. Today, in the studio, I have with me as a guest, Professor Burkhard Schafer from the University of Edinburgh Law School, and is a professor of computational legal theory. And we have been discussing whether AI chatbot has the competence to provide legal advice, especially those developed by non-lawyers. So far, so good. The response from Professor has been positive. Yes, they can, but with certain parameters such as transparency and a bit of regulation. And we are at a point where we're discussing a possible model for the African continent. Of course, he has highlighted two things. One is we can take it from a national front, and two, we can also consider a Pan-African model, which is what I'm looking at the moment for my LLM dissertation. The problem with Professor, if I may attempt to give a very premature, I would say, answer with that query of yours. The problem with having a Pan-African model, as you have raised, is that our continent is so huge and diverse, and the legal system is very different. I mean, these are all by virtue of colonial legacies, you know. So take, for example, the cybersecurity convention, the Malabo Convention. Up till now, only 14 African countries have ratified it because it doesn't, stem well with other countries. So there is a problem there. That is why I was deliberating asking you, which approach are we looking at? What type of model do we need? So having a model like the EU, which is one that is cross-national, or I'll say cross-jurisdictional, it's very difficult to have such a thing here in Africa because so many other laws are currently out there, but they have not been adopted by so many other countries because it doesn't fit well with their own national interest. So, and there is this competing schools of thought. One is the one that wants to foster innovation, like Rwanda, South Africa. Sorry, my bad. Rwanda and Kenya. These countries want to push innovation at the expense of individual rights, which countries like South Africa and especially countries in the SADC region, they are more, right-based approach. So that is the current problem. That is why I ask you. But now that you've mentioned the UK approach, I would like us to delve more into the UK approach. I have heard about the sandbox system where they are put into a test, and the chatbot is being queried and asked. And then also you mentioned the idea of professional bodies and their role. So can we have a bit of elaboration on the UK approach and see whether that resonates with some of our African countries down here in the continent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, as you know, even in the UK, we have 2 legal systems, and we have at least 4 official languages. That does not normally affect the administration of justice in a significant way, but law is a devolved issue. So even if it comes to where things comes to regulation of legal tech in particular, it is by far from clear that this is a question for the UK government, or whether Scotland and England should go slightly different routes, for instance, and explore different avenues and decide what is right for them. So even on a relatively small, a tiny island like the UK, we get that question: what sort of things are best done on the federal level, cross-nation level? What things are best done on the nation level? And law is, in a particularly strong way, linked to that concept of the nation state. There's no question about that. Also to, if it's not the nation state, to local cultures, to local traditions, does not necessarily travel well across these borders. And that is one of the reasons why for law, I'm quite happy to consider more a devolved approach. That does not rule out any sort of coordination from the center. What we find in Europe very often in that situation is mutual recognition. So we don't need a rule that says, here's a new body for all of Africa that certifies legal tech. That would not be possible. But here is a list of professional bodies of the different countries that we have approved. And if you are on that list, then you certify for your jurisdiction, and that is what we expect. So there is still a room for international, federal, central intervention, while still allowing quite a lot of adjustment for local specific rules. The idea of sandboxes, that is something we find generally in technology regulation more and more. We also find it in Europe with the AI Act. The UK government likes it a lot. Experimenting. Let's try to see what happens in practice. Create environments where we monitor maybe particularly closely what's working and what is not working, but relax the rules just a little bit. In principle, I'm in favor of that. I think it is probably more conducive to gather safely information than trying to keep everyone safe. I think I speak here to all the parents amongst our listeners here. The best way to bring up your children is to see what they are doing, but to allow them to make mistakes, to take some risks, to sometimes get a little bit hurt. And you are always hovering in the back and making sure that it doesn't become too serious, as opposed to having so many strict rules that they never encounter any danger in the first place. And then should something go wrong, don't know what to do. Yeah. And I think in a way, the same model applies for regulation. Sometimes making experiences is a good idea. Where I'm slightly more concerned with the sandbox approach, with the experimental approach, where it comes to things like law, is twofold. Firstly, who are our guinea pigs? On whom do we try out these technologies? And there's an unfortunate tendency to try it out on people who are already very vulnerable and do not have resources to fight back. The UK enacted legislation for fully automated legal decision making back in 1996, Social Security Act. Decisions on social security benefits from that point onward could be taken by a computer alone. That was an experiment. In a way, that was a regulatory sandbox, we could call it today, because certain rules that normally govern were relaxed. And the people that was tried out were social benefit seekers, the weakest, most vulnerable people in our society. I would have preferred to relax the rules on fully automated decision making for corporate mergers or for tax law. Those legal systems where people who have lots of social capital, who are insured, who can take a loss, are the guinea pigs. And we tried out on them. I would definitely prefer that. But in my experience, unfortunately, it tends to go into the opposite direction. So we have to be very careful when we design a sandbox. Who is at risk here? On whom do we try out these systems? And the second issue then is, what remedies do we have in place if something goes wrong? If you speak to a professional lawyer, to a accredited lawyer, they have indemnity insurance. And to the extent that your loss can be compensated with money, there will be a safety net for you. How would that work with legal tech? Certain things, again, can be compensated with money. When the legal AI gives me bad advice on how to get compensation for a faulty car, well, that's easy to quantify. Just get the value of that car. If it makes a mistake with the contract, again, easy to quantify. But if the AI gave me wrong advice when I was challenging a driving ticket, and as a result lost my driving license, and as a result of that I lost my job, it becomes already much more difficult to say what would be the right sort of compensation here. If I have to go to prison because of an AI, what is the compensation that could rectify that? So these would be, for me, the two things we have to be really careful. I like sandboxes. I think we need to gather information, we collect information, but please don't do it on the most vulnerable people in society. And if you do it, be explicit. What happens if something goes wrong? How do you make right? How do you compensate anyone who suffered a loss?
All right, Professor. Now we'll take some questions from Facebook and from YouTube. We'll start with Ibrahim Soriba Fodemansari from Sierra Leone, who said, "Quite an interesting topic. The world is evolving, and it's high time we thought about using these tools to our advantage. That being said, I would love to know the professor's view on the efficacy and relevance on the use of chatbots for nation building and its impact on policy formulation, security, and economic development, taking into consideration its inherent risks."
Yeah. Now, I'm old, as I think my white beard shows.
You're a young man, Professor.
I grew up long before generative AI. I still am a huge fan of the good old symbolic approach to AI. I still think it has a lot to offer. And I'm sometimes a bit disconcerted how much we are now using generative AI also in fields where it is not necessary, where we could probably use more conservative approaches. We can still have AI, but we don't all have to use generative AI. Even machine learning, more orthodox alternatives to machine learning existed for a long time, that I think do not have all the risks that generative AI and the large language models have. Large language models also come with a huge amount of unseen and hidden costs. They are massively energy inefficient. There are huge amounts of costs for the people whose data was scraped here. So I would not use them just for the fun of it or just because they are so easy to interact with. Having said that, because they are focusing on language, I think they open up opportunities for people who are not as technologically sophisticated to interact with these systems. It's not any longer necessary to learn complex skills. With some of the old AI systems, you had to change the way you were thinking if you wanted to work with them. That's a huge advantage, I think, of some of the generative AI systems. So yes, there are significant risks. We have to be very careful of the hidden costs that these systems have. We have to be also very careful of the dependencies that they create. If your entire business, if your law firm becomes totally dependent on ChatGPT being available, what happens if due to political reasons, they decide not to offer that service in your country any longer? Because domestically they get pressure from their government. So we become dependent on a very, very small number of infrastructure providers, which is not a comfortable idea for me. So absolutely, we need to be very, very much aware of the risks. I still think there are huge opportunities, but we have to be very careful to keep track of all the new vulnerabilities that creates for us.
All right, Professor, the next question on Facebook, again, it's from Mariam Fatima Kabiru. She asked, do you think AI tools could ever be trained well enough to meet the standards expected of licensed, emphasize the word licensed, legal professionals? Or will there always be a need for human lawyers, no matter how advanced the technology becomes?
Yeah. A couple of points there. I mean, we have to be a bit careful what we evaluate AI against. Sometimes we think of the qualified lawyer, the certified lawyer, as if they are all equally good. And we all know that is not the case. Even within the pool of accredited lawyers, there will always be some who are really, really good at what they are doing and some who are just about scraping by. They still adhere to the rules. They are not getting kicked out for gross incompetence, but they are not very good. So we need to be careful what we compare the AI with. So that is definitely one aspect. What is our comparator here? I think there will always be legal roles that can't be replaced by an AI. There will always be roles for lawyers, partly to supervise the AIs, but also partly to decide here the system has come to its limits and we need to have something else. AIs are, by their very nature, conservative. They assume that the past is always a reliable guide to the future. And as lawyers, sometimes we need to change the law. We need to push its boundaries. We need to have test cases that challenge it so that it can grow and organically adjust to changing societies. AIs, I can't see them doing that. So there will always be a role for lawyers. It might be that in the future, some things they do at the moment won't be any longer requiring a professional lawyer. But I also think there will be new opportunities for the legal profession to offer different types of services. There are lots and lots of skills and knowledge a lawyer has that could help other people, that could be used in advising without being traditional legal advice necessarily. And I think AI might be able to help them finding these new ways of doing business, adding value to their client. So I think the answer to that excellent question is very, very complex. In a nutshell, some work currently done by lawyers will be done by AIs and it won't be a problem. Some work done currently by lawyers will be done by AIs, and that is not a good thing, but it will happen. Some work will remain in the domain of human lawyers. I'm totally certain of that. And they might find new ways of doing business as well. So the legal profession will change rather than disappear.
All right, Professor, thank you very much. One last one. This one's asked, what do you think African countries must prioritize to ensure legal AI works for their people not against them.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, and that is an important thing for me. You want to involve those that are most affected and most at risk. Very, very often we make regulations or AI for them, but not with them. So involving the communities, asking them, what do you want? What do you need? Where does it hurt? What sort of legal advice is missing in your life that you could really benefit from? That would be one important thing, definitely. The other thing I think I sort of hinted at in an earlier question from you, Vuri, is there is a tendency, simply because it works best for English and for the large common law systems, to use them as a benchmark. And for me, again, the important thing would be there are other forms of doing law. There are traditional legal systems that coexist very often, also in Africa, I know, with the colonial legal systems.
We also have the
Very often
customary law.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and very often they are not served at all by legal tech. Look at the legal AI literature in Eurex and ICAIL. Even when there are papers from Africa, which are already the minority, they typically deal with the legacy of English or French or Portuguese, as the case may be, lawmakers, but very often totally ignore the traditional legal systems that coexist. I had a very interesting master student last year from South Africa who looked at COVID and the way during COVID trials were done online. And that worked extremely well for those cases that were decided under statute-based English law. It didn't work as well for alternative dispute resolution, for indigenous legal systems, simply because they had different needs. And no one sort of catered for them. So I would say the big risk is to treat AI as homogenizing law. And the challenge and opportunity is to say we want still diversity, and we need to find a way to cater for speakers of minority languages that don't have large language models, for the type of dispute resolution that does not follow the statute-based official law-based model. That would be for me the greatest opportunity and challenge.
All right, Professor, before we leave you, based on everything we've discussed, and in the current, without hypothesis, the current practical present going on, do we consult ChatGPT, say, for example, for legal advice?
Again, going back
I'm hinting on general purpose AI now.
Yeah. Going back to my first answer, it totally depends what you need the advice for. For certain types of questions, I would say it might be the best option that you have. If you speak English, that is, because that is the only, or Spanish, Chinese probably, one of the large language models that are robust. If you are a Gaelic speaker, forget it, because the system will not understand you. Or a Scots speaker for that matter. So if you are in the position to be able to use it at all, and it is a relatively low risk question, yes, absolutely, you can do it. Ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen if the advice is unreliable? I would treat it maybe a little bit like someone you just met in the pub and who seems to know what they are talking about, but you really don't know them that well. So you treat their advice as informative, but as soon as you base important decisions on it, you might want to go for a second opinion.
Noted. Thank you very much. If in the absence of any question from YouTube or Facebook, this is where we will draw the curtains for today. We've been in the company of Professor Burkhard Schafer, and we have been discussing whether or not we can consult ChatGPT to be our lawyer. And of course, the answer means it depends. and it depends to the fact what you are asking for. But Professor, my worry is this. I promise this will be the final question. Is where we are in a society of gullible people who, I mean, you mentioned the case of the hypothesized cases that were referenced by a chatbot to a lawyer, and this is a professional lawyer. Talk less of someone who is not a professional lawyer, who has no knowledge of the law, and especially the gullibility side, where people believe whatever they see or whatever they hear. So, what would be your final parting words for a continent that is blessed with many gullible people?
I think we as a species are we tend to be gullible. Well, I totally agree with you that this is one of the risks that we have with AI, also because the people most likely to use it instead of lawyers are the ones who probably are already poorer, less educated, don't have the resources, the skills to maybe be less gullible. I would not even call it gullible. It's just the sort of information that is available to you. If the only thing you ever get is ChatGPT, how could you possibly scrutinize it and analyze it? So I think there is an inherent danger, absolutely. But I would also say this is not a new problem. Misinformation, low quality information has been around forever. And as I said, I remember the early days of Wikipedia when we tried to explain to our students for the first time, you can't trust everything that is on the internet. Only because it looks a little bit like an encyclopedia doesn't mean in itself that everything on there is credible. And that goes back through the centuries. I would say every time there was a technological change, with it came the problem of how do we ensure information quality. So I'm not totally convinced that this is inherently new. The difficulty again would be to say, do you know that you are interacting with an AI, or does it dupe you into believing that it is a human? That is something we need regulation. But once you are aware of that, the problem with discerning reliable from unreliable is an old problem. There are technical solutions as well. Some of the chat answers you get these days, the Copilot answers, already link you directly to an authoritative source. They say, look, you don't have to trust me. Here is where my answer is coming from, and then you can check for yourself. So I think there are also quite a lot of design solutions available that can make these systems safer to use. And again, that then brings us back to regulation. We might have to nudge people, strongly encourage developers, if necessary, with legal sanctions, to make use of these solutions that are out there and ensure that the systems are as safe as we possibly can.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to provide us with this wonderful enlightenment. We appreciate you coming, and thank you to everyone that has tuned in for today's episode. This is your program, Wivo Legal Tech for Africa. We're trying to create a space where we can discuss these contemporary issues, these issues that are here in our shows. So until next week again, I have been your humble host and presenter. And on behalf of Professor Burkhard Schafer, we say goodbye and we'll see you again next week.